So again, good afternoon, and let me introduce your host for the afternoon, which will be Jonathan Charles. Jonathan.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. Hello, yes, my name is Jonathan Charles. I'm the Managing Director of Communications at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. For many years, though, up until 2011, I was, amongst other things, the BBC's Europe correspondent and spent 15 years covering the European Union for BBC television and radio, living in Brussels and Frankfurt and a variety of other places. And I remain a very keen watcher of European Union affairs, not just in my current job, but also as a hobby, strange hobby for someone to have, perhaps. So here we are, just a few weeks away from the end of the transition period. Today, we're going to be exploring what the new EU trading relationship will look like. We'll be building on experiences from the German boardroom. And of course, we do that at the same time that it's very unclear what the outcome of the discussions will be. Excuse me, we don't know exactly what the future trading relationship looks like in legal terms. We were just joking, perhaps not even the British government at the moment knows just what that trading relationship will look like. We've got an hour in this webinar. I'm going to introduce the speakers in a moment and get them to introduce themselves. This is not formal advice, I have to tell you, and shouldn't be publicized or reported on. It's Chatham House rules here. We're discussing this amongst friends, so please don't take it as legally cogent advice. This is the personal view of how our panelists see things going forward. The session is being recorded. It's going to be shared after the event. We'd love to have your questions, and please put them on the question and answer function here on Zoom. That's very important. It'll help form the discussion a little later on. I'll ask some of the questions. Feel free, by the way, to start putting the questions on now, even before we start, because that will help us later on. We won't be able to get to all the questions, but we'll get to as many as we can, and we'll certainly try and group them together into common themes if we can. And now there are a lot of you on the session, and as a result, of course, you're all in listen-only mode, but using that Q&A function will allow you to have your say. Now, let's come to our speakers. Ralph Kruger joins us, and also Andrew Davidson. I think we'll start actually, maybe Ralph, just in 30 seconds, tell the audience who you are, and then Andrew in 30 seconds, tell the audience who you are. Ralph.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan. My name is Ralph Kruger. I'm working for Lanxess. Lanxess is a relatively new company formed in 2004. We have globally 14,300 employees in all over the country, 33 countries in the world, 160 plants all over the world, 7 billion turnover. My role in the company is I'm the head of EMEA region for the group and located in Slovakia, Bratislava.
Andrew.
Good afternoon. My name's Andrew Davidson. I'm an advisor to the board of Cellpath. Cellpath are a cellular pathology company, not quite as big as Ralph's company, something over 10 million turnover, with about 100 employees, based in Newtown in Mid Wales. My association with them has been in parallel to what I've done. I've just taken a company called DTR Medical through to a sale from launch about 15 years ago. So SME world is my world.
Okay, and we'll be hearing from you a little later on. I should also say, of course, Paul Slevin, who you heard from earlier from the South Wales Chamber of Commerce, and Christian Kioch, also from the British Chamber of Commerce in Germany. We'll be hearing from them right at the very end. Let's start with you, though, Ralph. I mean, how do you see the future in this uncertain world? We've got, obviously, COVID-19, and on top of that, the uncertainty of the end of the Brexit transition period.
Yes, thanks a lot, Jonathan. Yes, we have to fight. We have to handle this with two topics. One you mentioned, COVID-19, of course, is something very dramatic. We as a company have to face. And maybe before going into some detail of Brexit from our point of view, allow me to share 2 or 3 points concerning COVID-19. So, of course, as a global acting company, we also have to fight against this topic. But I think we did it rather well because, of course, we reacted immediately, and our model was immediately healthy first. So, of course, we increased home office. We clustered our employees in 3 clusters. Let's say the ones absolutely essential in the company or the ones who could not work from home. Then we had, let's say, the normal one, who could work from home, and then of course our colleagues at risk means above 60 and with some health problem. Clear rules in the company, no business trips, and we changed the shift of working. Let's say from 5 shift, we went back to 3 shifts, which helped a lot. Indeed, until yesterday, we had around about 330 confirmed infections, and unfortunately also 1 fatality in the United States. But we had no shutdown due to Corona, which is very important for, let's say, a company with 160 plants all over the world. And what I think is very, very important, very nice, we are aware that it's not only on the guys working from home office to guarantee the success of the company, but the guys in the plant. So LANXESS is, I guess, one of the few companies giving a so-called Corona bonus, especially to the plant workers who day by day came into the plant and to guarantee that our vessels are producing material. So that's what I wanted to share with you concerning our COVID strategy. Yes, coming back to Brexit, we as LANXESS, we are full on the Brexit issue. For us, it's an issue because besides the business we have from EU 27 business into UK, we also have 5 production sites in UK where we ship material out of UK to EU 27 and all over the globe. Before I come to the company view, allow me a second to talk about the German view. So recently there was a survey made in Germany, and they asked the German people what if they would like to have UK in the EU, yes or no. And more than 70% of the asked people indeed said, yes, we would like to have them with us also in future. Okay, that's not possible anymore, of course. But it's also very astonishing that, let's say, the normal people on the street, if you ask them why the Brexit, they don't even know. They have no idea why UK decided several years ago to make this step. Let's say we as LANXESS, what is our situation? Of course, we have to face a cost situation. We will have very probably new custom regulations. We will have new transport costs. We have to face import-export duties. We have to register our EU employees. So things will become much more complicated for us. And a lot of topics are not yet solved, like data security, how will it be in future. Nevertheless, we as LANXESS, but I think also most of the German companies, they are committed to UK, at least for the moment being. And I think most of the companies, as LANXESS is doing, will observe what will happen tomorrow. How will UK cope with this new situation? What will be the real consequences we have to face? But of course, and we see it very, very clearly, we are afraid that UK as a market is losing attractiveness, competitiveness. And at the end, we are, let's say, a money-driven company, of course, as well. And when we have products, and the most companies, I think in Germany are thinking like this, we have to think, where do we get the most benefit out of that? And we have to pay in UK, as I mentioned before, duty, taxes, higher transport costs. I would not be surprised, again, today we stay with UK, but I would not be surprised that maybe the attractiveness of the UK market is decreasing. On the other hand, then we also have to think we are an expanding company, so we will have investments. And of course, what we have to evaluate is how attractive is UK ground in future for LANXESS for investments. again, business is doing very well, and we have to increase capacities, and also our 5 sites in the UK later or before, we have to ask ourselves, do we increase our plant in Manchester or in Branston or in Sudbury, or do we increase the capacity of a plant we have in Spain, which is producing the same product on the EU 27 ground? This will be the questions we have to answer, I think, very, very soon. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ralph. I mean, there's huge amounts there, and we'll come back with some questions on that. Maybe just one question, though, before we move to Andrew. Does it make any difference to you whether there is a deal or not a deal? Because obviously a deal will be a pretty hard Brexit anyway, without, probably as free a movement as the single market. A deal, no deal, will be even worse. But what's the difference between those two scenarios at the moment, even without knowing the detail potentially of those scenarios?
Let's say, if we would have a deal, means that the supply chain, let's say from EU 27 into the UK market, would be much easier. We are afraid about the custom activity. So, and they cost a lot of money. Let's say, I was not even so aware about that, but some week ago I got some number from our transport organization. And we're talking about a lot of money every year to spend for each single order we have to supply. And if we would have a deal, of course, it would make it much easier.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, thank you. We'll come
some other topic, of course. Some other topic will come anyhow. So I don't know how much you are familiar with the REACH regulation.
Yes, I remember REACH from my Brussels days. This is over the chemical industry, isn't it, and the regulation?
Exactly. Which is something very important, of course, because it is guaranteeing that the chemicals, which is not, let's say, warm water, but really chemicals, has to be handled in the right way. And of course, I appreciate that UK is making a REACH regulation as well. But of course, their own system, which is, of course, then to feed with new information. And of course, this will come anyhow. Deal, no deal, this will come. But of course, no deal would help a lot.
So you'll be doing paperwork of 2 systems, for example, under those scenarios. So you'll have to do it under the EU REACH legislation and the UK REACH legislation.
Absolutely, but it makes business also more difficult for the UK producers. So if UK companies want to, let's say, export chemicals from UK ground to EU 27, it brings complexity also for them, and cost, of course. Yeah. And as we already have enough competitors, UK as well as EU 27 from Far East, for example, so we are a little bit preparing the ground also for, let's say, Chinese or Indian competitors in UK. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for the moment, Ralph. Andrew Davidson, let me turn to you. How do you see it from a Welsh company perspective?
Right. Well, first of all, our business went in a similar direction to Ralph. Obviously, we didn't have the infection rate and the fatalities and things, but the business had to adapt to cope with COVID. Overall, I think I have to say that in the medtech sphere, because we do diagnostic products for cytology and histology labs, we had a fair amount of business as usual. There are still sick patients who don't have COVID. There are still cancer diagnoses. There are still all these sorts of things going on. But we had to. We had some reduction in demands, and like many other medtech businesses, we turned our attention to doing hand sanitizers, sanitizing solutions, and PPE, the dreaded PPE that they had to buy from China. Well, the UK medtech industry was ready and waiting, and quite a lot of the companies were able to diversify and cope because China couldn't at the time. So from a COVID situation, from a start, we didn't have too much of a negative position to work with. It was close to business as usual. We've been tracking the recovery, though. I mean, the biggest customer for CellPath, like most UK companies, is the UK NHS in its 4 countries. We still have a very strong export business, but that is still the home business. And first of all, we had to track the way the pandemic was going, track the recovery with more patients who were business as usual, elective cases, as you would call them, rather than it being COVID related, totally COVID related. And we've been working with the NHS on areas like patient backlog, the restart of screening that was paused, and we've been looking further forward. And the UK has probably, in counterpoint to some of the things Ralph said, the UK have been working on a project called Project Defend, which Department of Health and Social Care at the core of are trying to build a UK resilience. So we've probably been through the COVID situation to date relatively unscathed. Having said that, if you stand back from it, we have a perfect storm going on. We have COVID with an unknown, an uncertain future, and limitations on everyone's life. We don't know how if the hospitals were overrun, our business would fall apart. There's a big if there. We have Brexit on top of that, which again, we have a relative, I'll come on to that in a second, we have a relative immunity to, but we also have regulation. It was delayed by a year, but the medical device regulation, which is an EU regulation that was put in place with a lot of support from the UK authorities, and the IVDR regulation, this is a massive change. This is something that happens once every, I think it's about 13 years since it was last updated. So we've got a whole string of things going on, a lot of deadlines, and now behind or in front of, whichever way you look at it, the UK deal, we have a situation where we don't know what the UK authorities are going to do, how much of the European regulation they're going to take on. They've even added the term requirement as opposed to regulation. So there's a lot of, it's the same but different that we're having to take account of. So that's kind of where we get to. 75% of our exports, though, are in Europe, and Germany is about 5% of the total exports. And I think we've always viewed this probably as an industry sector, but we've always viewed it as somewhere between crisis management and contingency planning. And whatever news of any given day, it makes us think, well, which way's up? What's the priority? Where's the next barrier? I was concerned to hear the UK, as the 5th largest economy in the world, losing its competitiveness. But I'm not actually arguing with Ralph on this one. I think he makes a good point. But in our world, we're able to plan most things. We even have the benefit, you would call it the luxury, of, in theory, those customs delays. The UK authority has put in place the government secured freight capacity, express freight services, but that's only for medtech and pharmaceuticals. The priority being to make sure UK patients get all the treatment they need, despite whatever disruptions going on. Now, fortunately, pressures come from the various associations that is now a two-way thing. So we need supplies from Europe. We buy a lot of things from Europe, but at the same time, we need to be able to make sure that the European patient, the EU patient, can also get the treatments that they expect to have. So whilst we don't see customs, I think customs and paperwork, it will be an issue. Customs particularly is, if you deal with the rest of the world, it's just a bigger administrative burden, which is a bigger cost. And people like, I think it's DHL, are actually charging UK customers a minimum of £4.50 to handle things. And that, those things have got to be taken account of. And the best way of dealing with this is to be talking to the customers and building stock. So we've got sell-ins going on, as I get Ralph's probably doing some of this as well. We're buying in stocks of supplies. But I know from the general UK industry, because everyone's at home, the whole DIY home improvements industry hasn't got any stock. They've run out. All their Brexit stocks have gone because it's been used in the short term. We're not in that situation. We're able to build those things. But the next 6 weeks, and probably for the next 3 to 6 months after that, are something we've got to really keep our finger on the pulse, because anything could go wrong at any moment. And we haven't even fired the starting pistol from what the deal or no deal looks like, apart from reasonable worst case scenario, which is WTO rules, which for us is, we have again the luxury, 0 to 0.5% tariffs. We're not in the 10% tariff category. Doesn't make us less worried or more complacent, but it does mean that the whole delay of queuing at customs, the 7,000 lorries that have been talked about, those are real. And the short straits restrictions, those are real problems that we're all going to face.
Thank you very much indeed, Andrew. Just a reminder, by the way, to everyone who's watching, please put your questions on the question and answer function. We'll start asking them in just a moment. There was one question, though, before we come to those questions that I want to ask both of you, maybe starting with Ralph. We've got 6 weeks, as Andrew just helpfully pointed out there, before technically the regime should change overnight from the 31st of December to the 1st of January. Can you adapt overnight just like that when you don't know what the regime is you're adapting to, Ralph?
It would be arrogant to say yes, of course. Let's say of course not. And as also Andrew just mentioned, of course, to avoid, and this is our first principle, the disruption of the supply chain. We are indeed putting high stocks, let's say from UK material in EU27 and let's say European material on UK ground, because indeed we expect problems, system problems. But at the end, talking to our finance experts, for example, you know, it's not only to produce a material, to put it on the truck and to bring it there. It's much more difficult, let's say, to make all this number crunching and document doing. Let's say, as we are working on the Brexit topic since some year, our colleagues from IT, they are well prepared. It will not be done, let's say, to push one button, but it will take some day. But to bring UK from a EU country to a third-party country is no bigger issue for us. It will be handled in a few days.
Okay, Andrew, from your privileged position, what does it look like in the med from the med side?
I think we've got all the. I think, without being complacent, I think because we export to the rest of the world, I think it's a relatively simple switch from one system to another system. I think we're bound to get caught out with things, and it's more to do with the routine third world paperwork. And I think but the fact is we've been planning for that. So if it's anything less through a trade deal, then we will be in a better position. But I think we could cope with it from day one, but only because we've had, you know, I can't think how many briefings I've sat in from the HMLC, from Department of Health and Social Care, from the trade associations, from events like the Chamber are doing. You know, so I suppose forewarned is forearmed. But there's bound to be some curveball at the end of it. I mean, the politicians are going to enjoy this at some point, aren't they?
Someone's got to enjoy it. All right, let's move on to some of the questions which are coming in now. Remember to put them on the Q&A function. So the first one is to both panelists. Do the panelists think that the UK's opportunity to write its own standards may lead to an influx of competitors from outside the UK? And will this have an impact on quality of goods being sold in the UK? So is this going to bring in a lot of competitors into the UK? And what will be the impact on the quality of goods being sold in the UK? Ralph, you sort of hinted about more competition as a result of this, possible.
I think on quality, let's say if we talk about products, about services, I don't see any impact. Let's say I think every company, be it supplier, be it customer, has a standard of quality, and it's part of the business behavior to satisfy this quality. On the other hand, yes, I can imagine, as I mentioned before, that as of today, let's say we are in competition with some Chinese or Indian competitor, which is okay. But tomorrow, the customer, let's say UK, will become more expensive for several cost blocks. Then it's a question, of course, between supplier or producer and customer who has to pay the bill. But somebody has to pay that bill. Of course, this could cause some, let's say, as I mentioned, Far East competitor on the table. Yes, it can happen.
Andrew, are you expecting to see lots of non-EU competition, the floodgates being open for that?
No, I'm not actually, and not in the short term. And I think if I just take the standards first, I mean, the implication is that standards are lowered, the barriers get reduced, and the competition comes in, if I understand the question. I think the standards that we operate to have been largely influenced by the European standards that we are taking on board in sort of equivalence basis as a start point, and I'm fairly sure most of that is going to happen. We've got new regulations which are marginally different, but in all honesty, all our regulations have been European for a long time, and the UK authorities involved in every part of that have been significant influencers of it. So I don't think the UK is going to step backwards too far. I mean, if we're talking about chlorinated chicken from the US or something like this, that's an area that I couldn't really speak about. But I think in the areas I know, the standards are not going to be reduced. If you take it from a business point of view, and I've done a lot of business in the past with Far East countries, Pakistan, for instance, makes surgical instruments, which is a background I've got. We've actually, in that environment, reshored products. We'd reshored 50% of our business to the UK because the quality wasn't sufficient enough. And I think in my world, that is not an unusual situation. And yes, there is commodity. Yes, there is cost, sort of reduced cost product and lower quality. But there's a bit of a back pedal against that, because in some areas it leads to extended patient pathways and poorer results. So I think there may be a gradual or sector specific activity, but I don't think it will start probably with the areas that Ralph and I work in, because there's a balance in terms of safety, risk factors, and one or two other things. But in the environments like food and what have you, that may be a lot more shaky. I think you're on mute, Jonathan.
How about that? Thank you very much. There, you've just touched, Andrew, on something that another of our audience has asked a question about, a specific question for you. If your company supplies medical devices, how does this affect EU versus UK legislation? What are the plans around this? I seem to be getting the impression you thought UK legislation had been mirrored in a way to EU legislation ready for this. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to a presentation by the new chair of the MHRA, which is the UK competent authority in our world. So they're a bit busy with vaccines at the moment, and like the German authorities will be. Everyone has heard the phrase "the seat at the table." You know, the UK having a seat at the table. Well, the MHRA have had a very, very strong seat at the table, probably, matching the German and probably French influence on the European regulations and legislation. And from that point of view, I don't think we feel any disownership of our regulations at all. And I think if anything, the thing I hear is that the UK will be as keen as anybody to keep moving forward and not moving backwards.
Yes, I mean, and I suppose one of the differences though will be we'll no longer be in the European Medicines Agency from that side of things. So we have to mirror their activities, which will, double the amount of regulations that companies doing exporting to Europe have to do. They have to be classified by both.
I think you're right. Just to add there, though, I think because there is more move towards mutual recognition, the MHRA will join fairly quickly the sort of system that involves America, Canada, and Australia, New Zealand, and probably alongside Europe. And I think they'll get a seat in that environment fairly quickly. So some doors may be shutting, some seats may be being removed, but I think others will be opening. And I can't see anyone, both from the UK perspective or from the European or world perspective, wanting to keep such a large economy as the UK sort of on the back foot. And we'd want as much harmonisation as we can have, because that is the best way of doing trade across the world.
Okay, another question. Does the panel think that if a deal is agreed between London and Brussels in the next few days on a positive deal, to allow, will that allow the changes to be made to our rules and processes in time, or will an additional period of transition be agreed? Do you think there might have to be an extension of transition if there's a deal, just to sort out, in other words, the smoothness of going from one regime to another? Ralph?
Well, if I understood the question correctly, if there is an agreement, a deal in the next days, in the next weeks, I think the hurdle then will be the ratification process. And honestly speaking, it was said that if we don't have any paper ready to sign by mid of October, it won't be possible to have the ratification. Now I'm hearing that, okay, if we have a paper to sign until end of November, we are still in time. So I trust the voice of the experts. And frankly speaking, just my personal opinion, if you would have asked me 6 weeks ago, will be a deal or no deal, I would have a better deal with you on a no deal. Today, as of today, I'm personally much more confident, also because since some week, the politicians, they make silence and let the experts work. And this is giving trust that we will have a deal. And if the politicians will be able, the governments of these 28 countries, to ratify this agreement, I think no further extension is needed. By the way, I think legal-wise it's not even possible, but yeah.
Andrew?
Well, if I knew the answer to the question, it'd be very rich, I think is the flippant answer. Or I'd have bet a lot of money on it. I think what I agree with Ralph, actually, that the whole situation is likely to come to some sort of deal, however thin it might be. Politicians do not like walking away without saving face and without believing that they've got the right answer, that they can sell to their electorate. I can't see Boris Johnson having promised get Brexit done to end up with something that looks so watered down and tepid as being an issue. And on the other hand, I agree with what Ralph says when he says about the time frames and everything. And I think it's amazing how when I think it was the 15th of October was the deal had to be done by. That was the last absolutely end date. And now it's the end of November, or it's in the next few days. If the politicians want to change the rules, they'll change the rules. And I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't a final ratification. As long as the process was underway, that someone said, hey, look, we'll leave this till the 31st of January. I've never heard anyone say it, but I wouldn't be surprised if the politicians agreed that there was now a ratification period, that because of COVID, because of Christmas, because of whatever the reason they wanted, they would just slip the date a little bit so that everyone could be comfortable with it. Because wasn't there something when the Belgian, one of the regional parliaments in Belgium caused the hold up last time? And no one can guarantee that, be it the people in Brussels, people in London, and someone needs a little bit of wriggle room, and that wouldn't surprise me.
Well, I think, I would put money on there being a ratification period as well if a deal is done. And the reason is that probably the next time that this is going to be agreed by the EU 27 leaders will be the EU summit in mid-December, 14th of December. And obviously that only leaves a couple of weeks. So I think if a deal is done, there will be a period of forbearance in which, in effect, the deal is in existence and the transition period is extended without it being called an extension of the transition period, because no one will want an interregnum between two regimes. But obviously we've got to get to that position. And just so you know, one of Barnier's team has tested positive for COVID, so negotiations have been temporarily suspended by agreement, I've just been told. So that clearly will be a short period of that. But, time is running tight, and I think they all know. I don't think anybody expects this to be done and dusted, including all ratification in time. So I think thoughts internally in the EU are also turning to exactly what they will do, even without calling it an extension of the transition period. But anyway, let's move on to some other questions. As two companies that export to and from the EU, what social and personal impacts do you expect in respect of movement of people for business trips and for employment? Ralph, free movement of people.
Let's say this way, it will be really more difficult. It will be more difficult, of course. Today, if I decide in the morning I need to meet my colleague in Manchester, I book a flight and I can go immediately without any problems. The fact that now maybe we need some more document, this is for me something where I say, okay, it is bothering in a certain sense, but that means that I have to organize myself better than in the past. Say it this way. This is not an issue I really see. What could be a problem maybe is, as a company, you also like maybe to send expats in your important countries. And this might be more difficult. I can imagine it might be more difficult once UK is not anymore member of the EU. For all the rest, I'm in close contact to our HR department in UK. So we as a company registered all employees with some EU route. So there's a possibility of pre-settlement or final settlement. This is basically something bothering, but you can handle that.
So just to be clear, Ralph, in fact, in this second case, what you're talking about, say you wanted a German chemist to live in the UK for 2 years because you needed them to work here in operations in the UK, that might be more difficult because they would need some sort of settlement status eventually.
Exactly. But honestly speaking, we don't, at least I don't know the rule, how it will be in future. But as we do this, of course, also, let's say the German chemists, we send them for some year to China or even to Russia. So I don't think that it will be more complex to send them to UK. So it's a problem, it's bothering, but we can handle that, yeah.
I would hope not. Andrew, free movement of people.
Free movement of people. Well, I've always wondered if the interpretation should be inherent somewhere, is that free movement of workers, just to pick up on where Ralph was going, free movement of workers was okay, and that this had a little bit about various social security systems in the background to it. Only time will tell. I think from a personal point of view, we know that the UK population are going to get an awful shock when they all lose their blue cards for NHS reciprocal arrangements, and mobile phone bills go through the roof potentially, or things like that, which is a shock for the population. From a personal point of view, I think the documentation it's the same as going anywhere else in the world, isn't it? We have to go back half a step. So if I was going to meetings in Dubai or the Far East or something, you've got to, Middle East, you have to think more in terms of there may be new documentation. And I think the catch out will be not knowing the new thing. So for instance, I'm planning a trip to France next year. I couldn't just get in my car. I'll need a green card. I remember my father talking about a green card,
Yes.
when I was growing up. I mean,
Yes.
we're back to the old days sort of thing. And it's minor things like that. I think on the recruitment side of it, there are areas where getting the right kind of student, people who've been students who move into the area, move into Wales. The Welsh universities are very good at taking in a group of students. And in mid Wales, particularly where Selpath are, recruiting the right people and areas, sort of experts of chemists, be it regulatory people. Regulatory science is quite a big area for us. Getting those sorts of people, you do require the borders to be relatively flexible and get the free movement of workers. Now, how that's going to translate by the points systems and various ways that have been described, I don't think we quite know the answer yet. And I think that'll be an area where there'll be a bit of head scratching when they realise that it's not quite right, and a bit of tweaking to follow.
Yes, I was staggered the other day to discover that international driving permits, which we'll need in mainland Europe, are still cardboard. Actually, they're not electronic. Unbelievable.
Well, that's classic. Yeah. That just shows I was on the right wavelength.
Yes, exactly. It does take me back to my days of the 1970s or other, with some horror. Right, interesting question here, actually. Will British members of Parliament, after Brexit, have the mindset to stay compliant with EU 27 regulations and standards, or do you expect many new UK-only regulations to get back control prestige, and the justification of politicians for them able to say, well, we're sovereign, we can do what we like? Ralph, do you think that there will be divergence? This is a big issue for the EU.
I don't think so, frankly speaking. At the end, there is a common interest to live together, to cooperate together, to make business together. So of course there can be some thought, now we do things by our own, and it's fair, yes, of course. You are not anymore under the regulation of Brussels or the EU, but I think whatever the UK politicians are doing, they have to have one focus. They want to be re-elected after 4 years, and they have to do the right thing for the people electing them. So I cannot imagine that they are doing things which is not supporting the UK economy and the UK business and people,
Andrew?
of course.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked Ralph at first. I was thinking of some of our politicians in Parliament as to how they would respond. I think doesn't this come to the heart of the one of the sticking points on the deal, and that is the relative competitiveness of the UK versus the EU 27. And the politicians talk a talk of being much more sort of Singapore-like, of being competitive in a whole variety of areas, to be a lot more free thinking, moving forwards, keeping, being in a sort of an offshore environment that will all become so much wealthier in per capita. We'll be like Qatar at this rate,
Without the weather.
I think the reality is, without the weather, yeah. I think the reality is much more that we are still in groupthink. And, we were joking a moment ago about cardboard, cards and what have you. I think the situation will remain a groupthink for a long time. And whilst there may be, let's say that we look to the other side of the Atlantic and say, oh, we'll follow an FDA rule or do this, that, and the other. The fact that Europe is our biggest export market for the UK is not going to disappear anytime soon at all. And we will still have to live, our cars will have to have whatever level of emissions the Europeans want. The safety standards, it's a bit like the old, big bumpers in America on some of the cars, that these things are more convergent than divergent. There may be a bit of a noise created or whatever. I think the power is, how does the global environment move forward? And how do the UK politicians fit within that, but make it look like they've got a role to play? sounds a bit cynical, I know, but I think
It
something
is
along those lines.
it is a very, very interesting question, I think, because also it does raise the question, if you're not going to diverge, why leave the European Union? And I think in terms of justification for Brexit, it's one actually that a lot of politicians struggle with, because on the one hand, they know what they have to do to stay competitive if they want, but on the other hand, they want to signal some sort of divergence. But how do you do that without damaging the competitiveness? I think so. That's going to be a very interesting thing to watch actually in the years ahead. I think I would put money on that being an area to watch. Question, I think, for Ralph here. Ralph, you raised the question of inbound investment. What, as you look at it from the point of view of a European Union company, what would make the UK more attractive to EU companies so they can continue to invest in UK markets? What would you want the government to do to continue to make it an attractive destination?
That's a very good question. Let's say this way. We have, as a German company, to observe what will be the future UK. So as of today, it's difficult to predict how UK in administration, in paperwork, once you decide to invest in UK, will behave. Taxes will be very important, of course. On one hand, of course, as we mentioned before, we don't want to have this Singapore at the Thames on one hand. On the other hand, of course, we want to have attractive incentives to invest in the country. But I think the first topic is really to see if UK is the reliable business partner as it has been in the last 50, 60 years. This is, I think, the first topic we have to observe.
All right. Here's an interesting question, which I think we should ask, as we are here as part of the South Wales Chamber of Commerce. How can Welsh companies differentiate their product and service offering from the wider UK brand in Germany, or indeed anywhere else, probably in the European Union? Do you think, Andrew, it's possible to differentiate a Welsh brand from a wider UK brand?
It's a good question. And it's one that I get involved with quite a bit, because I have some fairly good relations with the NHS in Wales, and I have some fairly good relations with the NHS in England. One is about 5% of the UK market, the other is about 85% of the UK market. Excuse me. And the question comes about the home market versus the export, be it outside Wales, be it outside into Europe and beyond. The question of differentiation is what are you trying to achieve in terms of this positioning? Is it a Welshness related to the culture, the products that exist, maybe the working environment? If you're trying to attract inward investment, then if you got a house on the Gower, it'd be lovely, it'd be fantastic, and there's lots of other nice places. On the other hand, if you're just trying to make something more Welsh than does that benefit become significantly better or worse than just offering the product to a greater group of people? So I think it works both. I think it works both ways. I think the location works in its favour. I think the work with the Welsh government and the support and the NHS can give makes Wales an attractive environment, which also, and the links with the universities, I shouldn't forget that sort of business clinician, in my world, business clinician and industry works so well together, and there's a great network, that those are the kind of things that set product innovation, opportunity, process development, all those sorts of things, to then go sell to the world and not just Wales. And that's my kind of take on it, that there's a bigger market outside Wales, but it's a fantastic platform to start from.
Okay. Now, listen, time's winged chariot is definitely flying away from us. But one last question for you both, very, very tight answers if you can. And that is, are there any immediate short-term preparations that companies can make now in order to try to be ready for 6 weeks' time for the changes ahead? Anything immediately do you think that companies that haven't done enough can do now, Ralph?
I think every company has its own story, has its own situation to handle with any change in 6 weeks. when I talk to other companies, to friends working in other companies, I always suggest to stay in contact with a British Chamber of Commerce in Germany, because this is a direct contact. This is a direct also contact to the British embassy in Germany, and there you can get, I think, the best level of information to prepare yourself.
Okay, so Christian Keoch is laughing, I think, with appreciation, but we'll hear from him in a second. Andrew, anything finally that can be done in 6 weeks?
Most of the preparation's been done, and it's planning and listening. So it's making sure the distributors in Germany and beyond have got all the product they need, and it's making sure you've got the stock and supply, and just keep listening and keep talking, which is kind of a variation on what Ralph said.
All right, thank you both very much indeed, Ralph Kruger and Andrew Davidson, for joining us. A very quick summary from me, and I would say that having listened to this, but also having spoken to a lot of other companies, that considering the blanket of uncertainty and darkness in which companies are operating, they are about as ready as they can be under the circumstances. And that's, probably about as good as it gets right now. And I think we heard evidence of that from the two speakers this afternoon. That would be one of my takeaways. My other main takeaway would be the real test of all this is going to come a bit further down the line, when investors decide just how competitive the UK is as a destination, when they assess what has happened, and also how well British companies, Welsh companies included, are able to export and take advantage of any opportunities. And we're not going to know the answer to that probably for a little while. Interesting discussion. Thank you both very much. Thank you to the audience. Well, I think we heard a big plug for your organization, Christian Keoch. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you, Ralph, as well, of course, for those warm words. So I just really want to take a very short moment just to thank all of you, of course, for this very interesting discussion. Thank you, Ralph, Andrew, Jonathan. I think some very interesting points here. And obviously, thank you everyone for your participation as well today. I think the message that I'm hearing is that deal or no deal, obviously the world will not stop on the 1st of January, and there will be future business relationships, and beyond that, it's not just business, of course, but the all-important business relationships as well. So we here at the BCCG, the British Chamber of Commerce in Germany, have a, as you would expect, a bilateral, but also a bi-directional focus. So we're looking at German companies that want to invest in the UK or in Wales specifically, and also obviously the other way around for British companies that are interested in the German market. I'm the chairman of the Wales and Midlands region, so thank you very much, obviously, for joining us today. We, of course, as you would expect, we work very closely with our colleagues from the other chambers, like obviously the South Wales Chamber. Thank you very much, Paul, for this event. And I think, if anything, the one thing that we will lose after the 1st of January, I think, is sort of formal channels of communication at the EU level. That's going to be gone. And so I think events like this and forums like this, I think, are important, and to keep the communication at this level. And obviously that we will continue to do together with the local chambers here in the UK. And of course, there will be more events. There will be more to talk about come next year. And so we will continue to have these channels of communication. Obviously, we would very much appreciate to see you in one of the next events that we will do. So thank you very much for today.
Thank you very much
indeed.
Paul.
Thank you, Jonathan. Not that I wish to trample on your microphone for a second, but I'm going to. Ralph, thank you so much for everything that you've done. This has been superb. We very much appreciate your contribution from mainland Europe. Andrew, from mainland Mid Wales, very grateful to you for your words as usual. And of course, our host, Jonathan, couldn't have done a better job. Fantastic, Jonathan. Thank you very much indeed. And to the many companies that have joined us, there are a whole list of questions there, lots of stuff. There are some specific questions which we will come back to people on directly. So if you haven't had your question answered and it's on a specific issue, you can blame me, because I decided not to give it to Jonathan when it gets into certification and documentation around customs. I thought that was a bit harsh. So we will respond to that directly, and thank you all again for taking part. The Chamber, of course, like Christian, we work endlessly and tirelessly to help businesses to cross that divide which is being created. I think, despite what Christian says, why we won't have the communication at an EU level, we certainly will have it at a business colleague level. And I think potentially Brexit will intensify those relationships very deeply. I said in June 2016 in a hotel in Liverpool at an international trade conference that it would be business that will find the way through Brexit, not the politicians. And I still believe that today. So on that note, a very warm thanks from all of us at the Chamber, from all of us at the British Chamber of Commerce in Germany, and from our presenters. Thank you all very much indeed.